Hello everyone, it's CDA94581 here, and welcome back to another DIY Minecraft tutorial. Today, we will be covering behavior packs. Specifically, we'll be making custom entities. On screen right now is a list of timestamps you can use to jump around. Before starting this tutorial, I just want to say that this will be a long video, and will be much more advanced if you want to do it well. Entities require many parts, so we will have many sections, like making the server-side entity, client-side, models, textures, and animations. I will be touching on these a bit, however I also have dedicated tutorials for most of them. Ready? Let's start. So for this tutorial, I will be stating terms I use on the computer, however you can convert to other terms if you are developing on your phone or something. I highly recommend checking out my add-on fundamentals videos, which contain a lot of information before you start making add-ons, like the tools you'll need, and just useful information. Now, let's get started. So instead of going to the com.mojang folder, let's do something else for this tutorial, since we're going to be working with both resource and behavior packs. Navigate to a folder somewhere else. For me, I'm just going to navigate to my D drive. There, let's create a folder to store all your add-ons from now on. I'll just call it MC Add-ons. Let's create another folder inside there to house today's add-on. Inside that folder, create two folders, one for the behavior pack, and another for the resource pack. Alternatively, if you're on Windows 10, you can use the command prompt to create some behavior and resource pack junctions from the development packs folders of the com.mojang folder, which will make testing a lot easier, because it saves the trouble of having to compress and import it. However, other devices aren't able to do so, and so I won't be covering how to do this. Inside both of those folders, copy over their respective manifest.json and pack_icon.png files and modify them to your liking. You can open VS Code and the add-on folder and modify the manifest there. For the dependencies, set the UUID there to the header's UUID in the resource pack, and the version to the header's version of the resource pack. This basically means that the behavior pack requires the resource pack to be applied with it. Obviously, once you're done, be sure to save your files. Now, let's start to make our entity. Go into your behavior pack folder and create another folder called entities. Inside there, create a text file and name it whatever you want, with the file extension of .json. I'd name it something that describes the entity simply. Before starting, I just want to say I highly recommend making use of the tab feature if present. Basically, while you're typing something, if a suggestion pops up that you want, use the up and down arrow keys to highlight it, then press tab to autocomplete. This minimizes chances of mistakes. Alright, so type a left and right bracket to start off. Inside, type format_version, and set the value to the last time entities were updated. Currently that is 1.16.0, so that is what we'll point. Create a Minecraft entity object and a description object inside, then place in the following values. The identifier should make your entity unique. It should start with a unique namespace so other packs don't contradict. Never use the Minecraft or Minecon namespace, unless modifying vanilla things. Set the is_spawnable, is_summonable, and is_experimental values based on if you want the entity to be able to be spawned with a spawn egg, summoned with the /summon command, or require the proper experimental toggle enabled. Now close off the description object. That's all you need. If you want to be able to add or remove components when things happen, add a component_groups object. These group together components and can be added or removed when an event calls on it. Use your namespace to identify each one, and add in the components and values. Once you are done, you can close off that object as well, and create a components object. Components are what makes up the entity's behavior. Without them, they don't function. You can find a list of components if you go to your vanilla behavior pack, then documentation, then entities.html. There scroll down to the components in the server entity documentation. As a creator, you'll need the documentation a lot, so keep these files on hand for future reference. Follow the format and add in the components. You can then close off that object. Finally, I'm sure some of the components you added triggered events. These can be used to run functions, add component groups, remove them, and more. Add an events object if you have events. There are 4 built-in ones, and the others you can make yourself. Again, I recommend referring back to the documentation for more information on what to do with the events. Once you are done, you can close of the events object, and then finally close the Minecraft entity object, and finally the final bracket to close the final object. Let's test how it works right now. Send the folders to a zip file, and rename it to a .gaten extension. Double-clicking it should automatically import it. Now when we go to load it, we see that it functions like how we set it, however it doesn't show any textures, so we need to guess where it is. Next up, the entity model. I'm going to be using Blockbench for this, to make things simpler. I recommend also checking out some of their guides when you first start off. Create a bone group, and set the pivot point and things for it. The pivot point refers to the spot at which the bone group will rotate. Create cubes inside the bone group. The origin, size, and UV specify where the cube begins relative to the center bottom of the entity, how big it is, and where the texture begins, respectively. Rotation is a very useful thing, so you don't need as many cubes, making the thing much smoother to run. This is a graphic I found that explains it a bit. Once you've completed the model, you can paint on it to texture it, then save the texture file to textures/entity in your resource pack, and save the model to models/entity, also in your resource pack. Then, head over to the Animate tab if you would like to animate your model, and animate how you see fit. Save each animation to the Animations folder in your resource pack. Now let's compress and import again to test it. Make sure to delete your pack first in the storage settings, otherwise it won't import successfully. So, nothing new happened. Well, that's disappointing, but expected, because let's face it, how does the game know what textures to use? Create a folder called Entity in your resource pack, then create a text file called name.entity.json, where name is the name of your entity. Make a left bracket, then have a format underscore version of the latest, which is currently 1.10.0. Make a Minecraft client underscore entity object and a description object inside. Set the identifier to the one you had in your behavior pack entity file. Set the min underscore engine underscore version to your current version, so for me it will be 1.16.200. Create a materials object. This will control how your entity is rendered. I will have a link in the description with a list of a few preset materials that you can use. Create a textures object, which is the texture that your entity will use. Set the default texture to textures/entity/name, where name is the name of the texture file you saved in Blockbench. Create a geometry object. This determines the shape of your entity. Open your entity.geo.json file that you saved earlier, and find the identifier in its description object. This is what your value will be. Create a scripts object, and then an animate array. There, you can specify animations to run, when certain queries return true, or you don't need any queries. Queries basically test if the entity has a certain property, like if it's a baby, if it is moving, and more. The Malang documentation has information about this. Create an animations object. Animations you specified in your script/animate array will be here. Link these to the animation identifiers of your animation. Create a render controllers object. I will cover this soon, but for now just set the value to controller.render.name, and name is the name of your entity. If you want attachables, like armor, weapons, and other things, to render, set the enable_attachables value to true, otherwise set it to false. Finally, if you set your mob to be spawnable in the behavior file, then create a spawn_egg object. This will specify the texture to use for a spawn egg. You can create your own texture, in which you'll need to specify it in the item_texture.json file, or you can use the spawn_egg texture. The index specifies which texture to use, as the spawn_egg texture has many. Indexes start at 0, so the first item is 0, the second is 1, and so on. Now close off the description, Minecraft client_entity, and the main objects. If you want to have your own custom texture, go into the textures folder and create a file called item_texture.json. There, type in a left bracket, and then set a resource_pack_name value to something unique to you. After that, set a texture_name value to atlas.items. Then, create a texture_data object. Create an object with the name of the texture you specified in your client entity file. Now create a folder inside the textures one called items, and in there, create a 16x16 PNG image with a name of your choice. Back in the item_texture.json file, inside the object you created, set a textures value to textures/item/name, where name is the name of the texture you created. Let's test the pack again, and it still doesn't appear. This is because we still need to tell it values to use as its textures and things. What has changed, however, is that we now have a texture on our spawn egg item. Let's add the render controller. Back in your resource pack folder, create a folder called render_controllers, and then a file called name.render_controllers.json, again where name can be changed. There, again, a left and right bracket to start off, and then set a format_version value to the latest, which is currently 1.10.0. Then, create a render_controllers object, and then a controller.render.name object inside, where name is the name you specified in the resource pack entity render controller section. Set a geometry value to geometry.default. Create a materials array and then an object. Inside, set the value of an asterisk to material.default. Create a textures array, and if your texture has multiple, make sure to set it to array.skins, then a left bracket, followed by query.variant, and then a right bracket. Basically, if in the behavior pack entity file, you set multiple variants for certain cases, it will find the variant, and then in the array.skins array, it will find that index. Finally, if you want to specify parts that are visible or invisible in certain or all cases, you can do that with a part_visibility array, and if an entity query is satisfied, then it will be visible. Since the entity I am making doesn't need many of these things, I'm using the vanilla NPC files as an example. So that should be all that we need to do. Import the pack like usual. Let's load up our pack, and if you add the behavior pack first, it should automatically add the resource pack for you, because of the dependencies we set in the behavior pack manifest.json file. Now you can either find its spawn egg, or use the /summon command, with your namespace. If you did everything correctly, it should load just as you wanted. Congratulations. Many of you have probably noticed the ugly text though, like entity.namespace name.name instead of what you want your entity to be named. Fortunately, there is a pretty simple fix. Create a folder called texts, and in there, create a .lang file, which should correspond to your in-game Minecraft language. You can find the valid texts and language codes in the vanilla resource pack texts folder. If you are using English and plan to distribute, make sure to cover both languages, English US and UK. It can be as simple as just copying one file and renaming it. Anyway, on with what to place in there. For your entities, type in entity.namespace name.name equals text, where you leave entity alone. Namespace name is your entity identifier with the namespace, leave the other name alone, and set the text to whatever you want to display. For spawn eggs, type in item.spawn_egg.entity.namespace name.name equals text, where you can leave item.spawn_egg.entity alone. Namespace name is your entity's namespace identifier, the second name is to be left alone, and text is what you want to display. Now compress it again and rename it as a .gatten file. Before you apply it, make sure you have deleted your pack from Minecraft, or it will fail to import. Now if you go to try, the text should display properly. Congratulations, you have just made an entity. So now I've got a few things I want to say. First off, I want to say that I have a lot of things about JSON that I cover in my fundamentals videos, so if you haven't seen that, or you don't understand what I'm talking about, I highly recommend checking it out. Secondly, this is a much more advanced tutorial that covers many things and throws a ton of information at you at once, which could make things harder. However, if you persist and stick with it, continue to copy guides like mine, look at already made packs that are on sites like Mactl, you will figure out how it works. So just try, and as you try, you will get better. I personally started off about a year ago, only knowing how to copy Minecraft Gamepedia's texture guide, and slowly after persistence, I was able to understand their other guides and make my own things. So like riding a bike, learning will take time. If you stick with it you will get better. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments or in my Discord, I will be glad to help in any way I can. I wish you all the best of luck in your add-on making journey. And that is all I have for today. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I will be glad to help you out. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. I wish you the best in making add-ons, and I'll see you all next time.